What do we know or think we know about what a Kamala Harris administration would do with the economy versus a Donald Trump?
We don't know much yet. The campaign's only been going for 2 days. But I think we've got some strong bases for optimism. First, it's been the Biden-Harris administration, and if you step back, it really has a remarkable record. I don't think any administration has so outperformed the economic forecasts on the day that it came into office as the Biden-Harris administration has, and that's because of an approach that is about investing in America and investing in America's future. And if you look at some of the things Vice President Harris has done, they have that orientation to the future. She knows that our children are our future, and that's why the child care credit and investing in children, investments that reduced the child poverty rate by 1/2 when they were in effect, were so important to her. She knows that fiscal responsibility is central, and that's why she puts emphasis on the fact that we need to raise taxes where it is replacing the ineffective, massive corporate tax cuts that President Trump put into place. She understands that much of our future lies in exporting to the rest of the world. It's not her approach to call Africa and El Salvador countries, as President Trump did. It's her approach to work to strongly support their development, because she knows that more prosperous countries around the world make for a more prosperous United States. It's a new generational approach and a stark contrast with what came before with Donald Trump, and judging by what he's saying on the campaign trail, a even larger contrast with what would come if he were elected. What he describes, David, is a prescription for massive inflation. Ignore the deficit, bash the Fed, trash the dollar, cut back on labor supply by trying immediately to send millions of people home, stop subsidizing clean energy, and put massive tariffs on so businesses can't get cheap inputs. It's hard to imagine a better strategy for creating inflation, for creating high interest rates than the Trump strategy. President Harris, I believe, will avoid all those pro-inflation mistakes, and much more important, will build a future-oriented economy through our kids, through our technologies, through containing our debts, and through working with the world.
So let's talk about those pro-inflation policies, and specifically on the fiscal stimulus side, because you've been outspoken about that in the past, that has contributed to inflation. And investing in children obviously is one thing. She's also has been for expanded Medicare. In fact, at one point she was for Medicare for all. She backed off that a bit. She's also for rental assistance programs. What do you make of those? Are those good ideas? Assuming she could get those through, are those good for the economy?
I don't think it's fair to judge Donald Trump by the things he was saying when he was campaigning for office the first time, or even before, and that was a very different context. And I don't think that Vice President Harris feels committed to the things she said during her campaign for the presidency before she joined the Biden administration partnership and advocated those policies for 4 years. No, I don't think Medicare for all is a good idea, and I wouldn't expect that a Harris administration would push Medicare for all.
Laurie, next week, you and I will both be out in Aspen for the Aspen Economic Strategy Group meeting. While we're doing that, the Fed will be meeting in Washington. We'll have another Fed decision. We just had Bill Dudley, whom you know well, we all respect, come out just this week in a Bloomberg opinion piece saying it's time for them to cut rates as early as next week, and relying in part on the so-called SOM rule about where unemployment is going. What do you think about that?
On current facts, I would not cut rates next week. I think we need to be very careful about making the move, especially since when the Fed starts to cut rates, there will inevitably be an expectation of some cascade of rate cuts. It's certainly true that as the news has come in over the last several months, it's tended to be on the low inflation and on the soft economy side. And so markets have now adjusted to expect a rate cut in September. I had thought that that was a possibility, but not a probability. On current facts, I'd certainly regard it as a probability, both in terms of what should happen and what will happen. But I think it's the better part of prudence, particularly in so unsettled an environment where the deficit figures are coming in a very problematic way. I think it's the better part of prudence for the Fed to wait a little longer before cutting rates.
As you say, Larry, it's such an unsettled environment right now, and part of that unsettlement is what happens in November, which of these very different economic approaches we have in the White House. Give us a sense, from the Fed's point of view, do they try to take that into account, or they sort of ignore it? Ignoring it seems to be like putting your head in the sand.
I think the Fed needs to consider all the factors in the environment, whether it's the fiscal policy, whether it's business confidence. But obviously, the Fed needs to stay out of politics and not be trying to tilt in either direction. So I'd expect the Fed will be watching the markets, and the markets will be watching all the political uncertainties. And so in those ways, the political uncertainties will factor into the Fed's decision making. But certainly, I don't think the Fed should be explicitly getting involved in politics. I do think that there is an underestimation in the political class generally, but a far more severe underestimation on the Republican side of the fiscal policy risks in the current moment, where the Republicans are talking all about deficit increasing measures, whether it's on the defense spending side or on the tax cutting side, with nothing really pointing towards any kind of control, and at the same time making it harder for the country to sell its debt by trashing the currency. I think they are setting up the United States for a kind of Liz Truss moment. The Democrats are not as focused in this political year on the fiscal challenge as I suspect a new administration may have to be. But at least when fires are burning, they are not throwing gasoline. And that's a very important distinction.